Hey everybody, I hope you are doing well, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch my whiskey wandering videos. I just want to say that I am so thankful for the opportunity to make these videos, to gain some whiskey knowledge and perspective, and to be able to share this experience with you all, and I hope that you kind of really enjoy it. Now today, I am back in the warm waters of one of my local Costco's here in Los Angeles in Inglewood. Now, this is the first time I've actually been to this Costco, and it seems like they do tend to have a solid amount of standard types of whiskeys, which is a good thing to know, especially when considering other Costco's can be out of these whiskeys, and this might be one of the last places to pick some up. But also, there is one unique whiskey in here from India that got surprisingly high scores that I've had to actually put onto my radar for future whiskey buys. Now, before we get to it though, if you like these little videos of me whiskey shopping at Costco, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when my newest videos get put up. So thanks again, and let's get down to it. Okay, so today I'm in the Costco in Inglewood doing a bit of whiskey wandering, and I've always been hesitant to come out to this Costco just because the demographics of the area, well, they don't really seem, I guess, how do you say, conducive to having a great whiskey selection. I know people seem to think that all the Costco's here in Southern California have a above average selection, but the reality is there are a bunch of Costco's that I go to that I never even put up because, well, the selections they have are just sort of kind of meh, kind of sad. I mean, they have the staple types of whiskeys, but you don't always find that much interesting or unique or rare stuff at some of those other Costco's. But this one definitely surprised me a little bit by having a reasonable selection of Costco staple type whiskeys and some of the more interesting whiskeys as well. So let's talk about the first one that I saw. And like I said, this one seems to run out of the higher end whiskeys slower. So they sell off their higher end whiskeys slower than some of the other Costco's. And it seems to be the case with this specific whiskey, which is the Barrell Spirits 15. Now, about a month ago, this was basically everywhere. You could still find it here, you can find it there, but now it's kind of hit or miss, and really not as much as there was availability before. But for some reason, it's not selling that fast here at this Costco. But these Barrell Spirit guys, they seem to be having a moment right now, primarily because they really specialize in sourcing whiskeys from all sorts of disparate sources and combining them to make an interesting and sort of out-of-the-box styles of whiskeys. And this Barrell Spirit 15 is definitely one of those. Now, it is a very approachable cask strength, being on the lower side, and so it seems to be banking on the need for kind of a more unique and innovative flavor profile, and obviously the whiskey drinking public's unquenchable thirst, rather than making these very luxury high-end whiskeys in the traditional brackets of bourbon. So it does sound interesting, but it's not going to be like a traditional luxury whiskey product. The price at Costco is set at $199.99, which is a bit high considering the weight class that the price puts it in, the 15, is filled with lots of really competitive other whiskeys. But on the street, high and low, the average is set at $284.49 on the high side, and the low at $249.99 on the low side. This means that the combined average street shelf price is at $267.24. So if you do end up buying it at Costco, you'll save around $67 in cash, or 25.16% off the average street price. So that's still a pretty good savings. Now, the ABV on this one is at 52.55%, which is oddly specific, but puts it really on that lower side of the cask strengths whiskeys, which usually range between 52 and 66% ABV. The tasting notes on it describe the flavors as tobacco leaf, dark chocolate, apple cobbler, and a quote-unquote flavor roller coaster. The average reviews on the Barrell Spirits 15 is at a pretty good 89.67 points, which is what you would expect for a whiskey that's at $200 or so. But the main detractor for the under 90 score is that the low heat, or the low ABV, seems to take some of that force out of the flavor. Also, because the flavor palette and the flavor journey from start to finish seems to sidestep the baseline that normal traditional high-end bourbons tend to follow, which is interesting, but could be sort of off-putting for the more established bourbon drinkers. So in conclusion, I think that with this price, it's just going to be a little bit too high for me, and there's too much kind of hush-hush and cloak and daggeriness about the sources and the types of mash bills for this whiskeys for me to shell out $200 on it, when I could actually get something else that is less of a flavor risk, but basically for the same price or even less. Now, the next bottle that I have really been rolling around in my head, kind of debating as to whether buy or not, is this Woodford Double Oaked. This seems to be Woodford kind of rolling with the current popularity of bourbons being really oaky. So they will essentially age the bourbon in one barrel, maybe like an ex-bourbon or a sherry. I mean, I've seen the sherry like in the Redbreast Listowel, the Redbreast Pedro Jimenez, or even the Lafroig sherry cask. Or sometimes they even put them in ex-Armagnac barrels. But then, specifically for the Woodford, in the second barreling, they're going to put the bourbon into a brand new charred barrel. And basically, from my understanding, what this does is it really changes the intensity and the flavor of the taste. I mean, I guess the way you can think about it is like by having the double barrel, you get a dynamic of a grizzled, old, mellow, and mature flavors that are nuanced, and put that together with the second barreling being more youthfully strong in personality and brash and, you know, I guess like Gary Busey and the young Keanu Reeves in the original Point Break. Utah, make it two. Anyways, this Woodford Double Oak has been everywhere at Costco, but seems to be getting bought up pretty quickly. And the cost of Costco is a very approachable $39.99, with the high and low end of the street shelf price at $79.99 on the high side and $52.99 on the low side. So that's going to put the average street shelf price at $66.49. So if you end up buying it at Costco, you will save around $26 in cash, or 39.68%, which is a pretty good percentage. Now, the ABV on the Woodford Double Oak is at 45.2%, so it's sort of mid-range on the alcohol. And the tasting notes mention fruity caramel, oakiness, long, slow, consistent finish, and polished leather. Oh, and specifically tannic flavor, which totally makes sense since they are using these new virgin barrels. The reviews on it gave it an 87.33 average point score, which is pretty good. It mentions that the flavors are complex, very rich, and best suited for people who are new to bourbon, like myself. So, sort of think like chicken McNuggets. You know, you can love them or you can hate them, but the flavors that they have are easily processable and easily able to be enjoyed. So, in conclusion, you know, I think the inner contrarian in me just gets the best of me in this situation and telling me not to buy it. It's just so popular, and Oscar Wilde said that everything popular is wrong. And, you know, maybe he is wrong. But I think for this one, it's probably a very good whiskey, a bourbon. But I would say, I think I'm just going to save my money for something that is slightly less mass market. I know that the normal Woodford is good, but being so approachable, it may not be the type of bourbon that would contribute to the advancement of the palate in the way that I want. So I think for this one, it's going to be a pass. Now, the last whiskey I'm going to talk about today is one that is actually really, really interesting, and I sort of regret not buying it now. And honestly, it's just because I was being a bit snobby about it. And it's the Rampur Asava. This whiskey is actually quite intriguing, and after I looked at the reviews and tasting notes, it definitely would be on my new wish list. So the Rampur Asava is a whiskey that is made in India, in the Uttar Pradesh state at the base of the Himalayas. At least that's how it's built. It is matured in ex-bourbon barrels and then finished with red wine casks from India. And I guess India has been making whiskeys since the mid-20th centuries or so, and then started really releasing it internationally in 2016. Now, the price on this one is at Costco at $78.99, which is another thing that added to my hesitation because it's kind of a lot of money for a wild card whiskey. But the street price, high and low, is at $103.99 for the high side and $75.95 on the low side, with an average price on the street being at $89.97. So at Costco, it would come out to a pretty meager savings of only $10.98 or 12.2% if you bought it there. And I think really the reason for that is that Indian whiskeys, well, let's just face it, they don't get the same hype that bourbons or scotches or some Irish whiskeys do. So I don't think they command the same premium over the MSRP that you would get off something else. But it doesn't mean it's not good. It just means that people aren't willing to pay for it because it's not, you know, kind of in vogue or whatever. Now, the ABV on it is at 45%, which is straight down the middle of the low-end range of ABV. And the tasting notes are where things actually start to get really interesting. The notes mention that it is light but not chewy, herbal, floral, mint, cracked black pepper, and pipe tobacco. So kind of sort of really like having a meal at a high-end Indian restaurant, which it could be really good. It definitely sounds worth exploring, to say the least. And the review points gave it an 85.5 points, which most of the reviews being in the mid-80s, but with a few lower in the 70s. So I think I could probably chalk that one more up to personal preference rather than flaws in the whiskeys. So in conclusion, in honest, I think that I'm really interested in picking this one up at some point in the future. I know it's not going to be the kind of bottle that's going to impress your friends, and it's probably not going to look great on your whiskey collection. but it may be a stealth delicious whiskey that you can just enjoy by yourself, or bust out when you have, adventurous whiskey friends, or just keep it a secret and enjoy it when you want something that's sort of outside the archetype of normal Scotch, bourbon, and whiskeys. So this one, I think it will be a buy for me next time I see it. All right, so that's it for today's Whiskey Wandering at Costco in Inglewood in Los Angeles. Thank you all again so much for watching to the very end. And I hope you really enjoyed the video. And if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get notified when my newest videos get put up. Also, remember, if you see a whiskey that you love, just buy it. Because if you don't, somebody else surely will. And it might even be me. So have a great rest of your day. I'm out, and adios.